Yo, Lord Willin, Jeff Canarsie, Mob Talk Radio. Check it out. Yo, we stay quiet like Russell Buffalino when things will get ugly like Pesci's death in Casino. Who do we know? No one, nobody. But we're all well respected like Della Croce and Gotti. I know wild nights, Havana nocturne. Light up a cigar and watch your spot burn. You'll get patty whacked, I'm tough like Irish dock workers. Rubber guys with guys, hooligans and block lurkers. Corner berserkers, street savvy soldiers. You owe, you better pay. Don't make me say I told you. Code you don't betray, I say what I mean. Providence and Brooklyn all the way to the Bean. I'd rather be unseen, like Vinny the Chin. I don't gotta go to Vegas to see cities of sin. Pull the pin, drop bombs like Danny Green. I write homicide like the murder machine. Lansky Luciano, mastermind the racket. Up in the clam house with a million in my jacket. Move around when the streets get darker. Pay homage to real bosses like Gambino and Patriarcha. Mob talking, but you don't talk to the mob. Lord Will and Jeff Canarsie, we stay on our job. This is Mob Talk, straight from the streets. Mob Talk, the life over beats. Lord Will and Jeff Canarsie, bringing you the real. Kill all rats, you already know the deal. This is Mob Talk.
I'm going to tell you something. If you two never bother me again the rest of my life, I ain't giving them attention. I can't. There's good friends of mine out on the stage. Well, he's divorced, you have to do his husband. That's why I said to you before, you don't understand what the man says. Come on to me that the boss is your boss. I'm going to tell you something.
All right, and welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I'm your host, Jeff Canarsie. We're doing something a little bit different today. Every once in a while, somebody will come along who's got a film coming out, and I will get access to that, and I review it. And this is sort of a new thing that I'm doing. I've gotten a lot of offers to do this before, but I sort of tend to stay away from it because I'm such a prick when it comes to reviewing films. Especially when you're dealing with a film that has to do with street stuff, right? At times I could be a little overcritical. So I've always kind of tried to shy away from this kind of stuff just a bit. But this one I actually did today. I watched the film, which I'm going to show you really quickly, the poster for the film. The name of the film is St. Michael of the City. And just so you know, this is not a Hollywood blockbuster filmed movie. I believe this is a very independent film. And so when you're watching a very independent film, you can't use the same standards that you might use when you go to see, I don't know, something The Rock is in. Completely different. There's a lot more money involved. And with independent films, I've always loved independent films because that is where the true filmmakers and the true writers are. These are guys that are trying to get to a certain level. They put their best foot forward. You know, from my perspective, this is one of the better ones I've seen. I got to be honest. This film, which stars Adam Radcliffe and Kevin Interdonato, is a pretty good movie. I'm going to go through some stuff and sort of critique it a little bit. But this comes out next week on Amazon. So if you have the opportunity next week and you're on Amazon, I want you to just watch this film and get your 2 cents. It's called St. Michael of the City. And so this is sort of going to be my review. And for those of you that are fans of the Mob Talk radio stuff that I do, we will be back doing lives probably in the next 2 weeks, for those that are wondering. So the general synopsis, and I'm not going to give any spoilers away because I want you guys to go watch this film for yourself. But the general sort of premise is that the character Michael, played by Adam Radcliffe, returns to the old neighborhood after being away for several years. And he sort of gets back into the mix of the old gang on the streets. It's a story about a guy who left, who returns sort of to the old life that he left behind. And I'm not going to tell you what he returns as because that's kind of going to spoil the whole thing. So we're going to leave it at that. Okay. And this film really from Jump Street, from the very beginning, reminded me of South Philadelphia and even New Jersey, certain parts of Jersey, because it's tightly wound around the neighborhood. And it's not very often that you see these neighborhood type of films that resonate very well. They're either usually really good or they're really bad. There's no real middle ground, right? But this is one of those neighborhood films that resonated with me, and I recognized a lot of the characters, or I could at least make sort of that jump to say, wow, this guy reminds me of this guy that I know and that guy. So the internal struggle that Michael, who is played by Adam Radcliffe, is supposed to have sort of falls flat. Because within 20 minutes of sort of watching this film, I realize who Michael is, why he's back, and what's going to happen as a result. I know that when you're independent and you want to foreshadow films, it's very hard to foreshadow because you don't want to give too much, right? But I knew almost immediately just because, and I'm not saying it's predictable, but it kind of is in a sense. Uh, while this film is character driven, I found the character Cuz, played by Kevin Interdonato, to be conflicted, stressed, a haggard type of guy who knew he was living on borrowed time. And I got to be honest, it's one of the most realistic portrayals of the street life that I've seen in a long time. Kevin Interdonato is a fantastic actor. He really, at first it comes off where it's kind of like you ask yourself, Jesus, this guy on coke, he's running around everywhere. But you're realizing quickly that it's chaos. The streets are chaos. And it's very seldom that you can see a film that's filmed in a chaotic, jumbled sort of way. That's the pace of the streets. And I've never really seen that before in a film to the extent that these guys were able to do this. And like I said, this is one of the more realistic portrayals, especially with the character Cuz, that I've ever seen. For example, there's no glitz, there's no glamour, there's not wads of money, and the streets sort of wear on Cuz like a permanent tattoo. This is a guy who from Jump Street, from the second you're in, the first 8 minutes of the film, you get it. You know the type of style that he's living, and he wears it. He wears it like a scab all over his body. It's not very often you see that. And I think that, in my opinion anyway, other people may disagree, I think that it was portrayed more accurately than most characters I've seen coming from any sort of street film. Okay, this is not Mafia stuff. I just want to make that very imperative, because if you go into this thinking it's Mafia, then there are going to be things in the film that you see that you say, wait a minute, so this is not Mafia. These are just criminals. Okay. The character of Cuz lives every single day as if it's his last. He knows his time is coming. He's enjoying the moment for what it is, because life is fleeting and he knows it. Everybody has a time clock on the streets. And almost from the first 8 minutes of film, you realize that it's coming. And I hate to compare this to any other film, because I don't think that that's, a really nice thing to do. But Cuz was a character, and we all know a guy like Cuz. And that resonated with me, because in any character you watch in any type of film, right, you have to feel something for that character. Otherwise, it falls flat. Michael, played by Adam Radcliffe, on the other hand, in just my opinion, slows the pace of the film. Okay. And the reason why it slows the pace of the film is because you don't really get a three-dimensional version of who Michael really is. Your information is sort of limited to, he left, now he's back. And, I understand from a writing aspect, you don't want to foreshadow too much. And I understand what they're trying to do, but I think Michael kind of drags the film a little bit. And I get it, I mean, it's him not being as open or as talkative or not knowing so much about him is supposed to form a mystery. But the problem with it is it almost hands you the premise of what's going to happen almost immediately. Like I said, he's quiet. He doesn't offer much. He's a little bland. He's a little boring. And while we're supposed to see the internal struggle from the character, you really don't get that from Michael until the last 20 minutes of the film. And I get it. There's a crescendo effect. I totally understand what they were trying to do. I'm just saying, I think that I would have accepted the character Michael a lot easier if I knew a little more about him at the beginning. And I had a hard time buying that he was a tough guy. I got to be honest with you, because he comes off more white bread than a street guy. And I understand. And the problem is, I don't want to tell you the premise of the whole film because it'll destroy it for you. So I want you to enjoy it and see it for yourself. But anytime you have, a character, they got to be three-dimensional. You've got to see something. And also in this film, and I don't want anybody to think this is all negative because it's not. There were a lot of throwaway scenes that I think slowed the pace of the film that weren't truly necessary. I think there was a lot of endless dialogue, which doesn't advance the film, but it slows the pace to a crawl in some scenes. But at the same time, some of that over dialogue driven scene lets you, know more about who the character Cuz is. But I think it was a little unnecessary. I think there was just some dialogue that just was a little too long, and they could have shortened it. They could have shortened it a little bit for my tastes. And parts of the film were chaotic. They were jumbled, but that's how the streets are, right? So that's a fresh perspective on the lifestyle. As the streets themselves are unpredictable. So from a visual aspect, the dark tones, the low lit scenes, it lends itself to a world that most people cannot fathom. And that was a brilliant choice by the cinematographer, the lighting director. That was it needs to be blue tones, dark tones, because dark tones lends itself to sort of arch criminal type of stuff. I thought the supporting cast was excellent, beyond excellent, and it lent itself to the storyline. And so where I drifted away a little bit was with the antagonist, the crew leader or the boss character named Paulie. I thought he was bland. I thought he was cliche. And we didn't know enough about him to understand whether he was completely dangerous or not. He just kind of comes off as an archetype, right? Has the looks of a Richard Roundtree, but he doesn't have the swagger or that danger feeling that you'd expect somebody to be a crew leader or a boss stature to be. And I think foundationally speaking, I found myself wanting to see more of Cuz more and more and less of everybody else, because there's a story there that I want to know about. I want to know like what Cuz was like when he was in his 20s. And that's what's brilliant about the writing. And that's what's brilliant about the portrayal by Kevin Inardonato. It was just good. It was good from that aspect. The storyline itself was one we've seen before in in a bunch of different incarnations. So it wasn't new. It wasn't a fresh idea. But what made it work was the acting chops of Kevin Inardonato. Fantastic. He made the premise work. And like I said, this is a neighborhood film. And by that, we've all been to neighborhoods where there's a certain element to it, especially South Philadelphia, Trenton, New Jersey, and even in Boston. And from that aspect, they pulled it off completely. They really did, because most of the characters that we did see will remind you of people in those little dark corners in the neighborhood that we all knew. In the opening few minutes, dark tones, smoky bars, dim lit scenes, realistic dialogue, it sets the tone and the pace for the film. Incredible. Great. And it's great to see that a film used tones to set the stage for sort of the seedy underbelly of life. From that aspect, I loved it. As far as the scenes of violence, I thought they were well done. However, the only knock I have is shaking of the camera during a fight. I mean, that's the old school way of inciting chaos visually on the screen. And I knew what they were doing because I'm familiar with the process of filmmaking, so I knew what they were doing. So if you don't understand the process of filmmaking, shaking the camera kind of gives it this, well, let's see if I can do it here. It gives it instability. You know what I mean? And that's what they were doing. And if people aren't familiar with the filmmaking process, that's not going to bother you. But like I said, I'm kind of a stickler for certain things. But I know why they did it and why. But I think there was a better way to convey that. Overall, my final sort of synopsis of all of this, of how I gauged this film, especially with my back writing and screenwriting and filmmaking and street stuff as well, I sort of based this film on a scale of 1 to 5, right? So I had a couple of different things like cinematic score, the characters, and etc. So I'm going to go through that really quick. So on the storyline, I gave it a 3. And I gave it a 3 because even though it's a familiar story, I think the tones and the dialogue in many scenes are more authentic than you're going to get in some big budget films. That's just the truth. From the character aspect, I gave it a 3.5. And I did that because the supporting cast was above board. Anybody that knows anything about casting, even when you're casting background actors, you either get somebody that blows your mind and is fantastic, or they ruin the whole scene. So they casted very accurately the supporting cast on that aspect. And they were better than I would expect them to be. And personally, Kevin Interdonato carries this film on his shoulders. And if he's not in it, I don't think it would work. Adam Radcliffe, I don't think he's a bad actor at all. I just think there was a little more there we could have seen. I think he was a little too passive, and he came off as stiff. You know what I mean? Anytime somebody's conflicted, they always use the booze, the drugs, the sweats, the nightmares, or whatever. I think there was just more that they could have done to make it a little more suspenseful, to show that he's really going through this sort of inner turmoil. The character of Cuz, I gave a 4.5 out of 5. The character of Michael, I gave a 2.5. And that's just because I wanted to see more. He was a little too bland for me. And with characters, you got to feel something for him. Empathy, hatred, anger, frustration. You have to feel something, right? And I think Michael was just a little too bland, a little too boring, and he didn't offer a lot. And it comes off as stiff. And that's not gauging him as an actor. That's maybe just from page to celluloid. Sometimes that gets lost in translation. Been there, done that, know how that works. The character of Paulie, I gave a 1.5. And the reason that I justify that is there's just not enough there. You can't really gauge him. You don't know much about him. You just know he's the fucking man. This is the guy you don't want to upset. And I think they could have done a couple of things differently to showcase why he's a bad motherfucker. Just saying he's a bad motherfucker isn't enough. From a cinematic score, which from my perspective includes tones, style, music, segues, cutaways, dissolves, locations, and more, I gave it a 3.95. They did a great job of showcasing the neighborhood, but I think they could have gotten a little more inventive with some of the shots. I was kind of waiting to see an overhead shot, a lot of mid shots, a lot of head shots, which are great. I would have loved to seen a God shot. That would have been kind of cool. I would have liked to seen some little lower level shots, but that's just me. I think the totality, the film leaves you sad for the whole entire group, right? And like I said, I'm not going to spoil the ending, but it leaves you wanting to see more, and you want to experience more, especially the character cuss. In any film that is character driven, you have to have incentive to either like them, to hate them. And I think the thing is, there just wasn't enough time in an hour and a half film, or whatever the case may be, to really include all of your character backgrounds. It's impossible to do. I'm sure that Kevin Interdonato knows that. It's impossible to showcase everybody, and you really have to, it's like a roller coaster ride. You get in and you got to hit them in the first 5 minutes to keep them, and then it's like a roller coaster. It goes up, and then the bottom falls out. And that's what makes films successful. And so I understand from a different writing perspective how hard that is to convey. But I think at the same time, if you're not very careful about how you layer the internal conflict, how you layer the story, the 3 parts of a story, the beginning, the middle, and the end, you meet the characters, you understand who they are. Here's what the problem is. And then there's the resolution to the problem. I think it's almost impossible in the amount of time to showcase every character that way. But if your character is pivotal to the plot line and for the story to keep moving forward, you got to give them a little bit more, because you got to feel something. Like, I got to fucking hate Charlie. I got to want Charlie to get killed. Not saying he did or he didn't, but that's what you got to want. I will admit this. The character of Michael, I fucking hated 10 minutes in. I knew what he was 10 minutes in. You can't fool me. I knew what he was. And so from that aspect, he did portray it the right way. I just wish there would have been a little more suspense leading up to it. You know, that's it. I mean, that's really all I can say about that particular thing. But like I said, you have to elicit a response from the audience in some form and fashion. And you got that with about every character. With Michael, I would have liked to seen it a little bit more. He came off a little too bland for me. But like I said, I think the writer, whoever wrote this, wrote it intentionally that way to make him aloof, to make him someone internally conflicted. So I understand from a writing aspect why that would be the route that they would go. But I wanted to see Michael more conflicted, maybe more details about why he left the area to begin with, other than a couple of snippets of, well, this happened, I wanted to get out. Like there's more to it than that, right? And I just think when you're pitting two lifelong friends against one another, there has to be a bigger internal divide before the last 20 minutes. But this is a film, it's a roller coaster, and that's the way it goes. So in totality of this film, out of 5 stars, taking into consideration every single thing I just mentioned, I'm going to rate it a 3.5. I don't think it was a bad film at all. I'm actually going to try to watch it again later. Like I said, I think if you go into it knowing that is an emotionally driven piece, especially the ending, my God, I mean, Kevin Interdonato, his character Cuz in the end is realizing everything and just the emotional anguish. He's an incredible actor. He really is. I was impressed. I was impressed really with the tones, impressed with the dialogue, because even though there's dialogue you can throw out of a film, you know, the old rule of thumb is if it doesn't enhance the story, throw it out. But I think they made good choices about what to keep, because it showed you more of who they were at their core as people. I just think that there were some scenes that could have been thrown away to advance the plot a little bit, but that's just me. They're the ones making the film. I'm the one watching it. So like I said, in total, 3 to 3.5. It's going to be available on Amazon next week. So if you get an opportunity, I want you to go out and watch the film and see what you think for yourself. For those that know me and know sort of my critiquing of all types of films, it'll probably surprise you that I like this one. There were parts I didn't like, but that's what makes the movie going experience an experience. And I think Kevin Interdonato is, if he's not a big star soon, he's going to be. He's a very talented actor for sure, hands down. And I think that guy could play anything and it would be passable. Some people, you know, when they're in films, I'm not going to mention any names, but there's another one who does films who's out there. Everything he does, I hate. I just can't even stand to look at the guy's fucking face. And I think you all know who I'm talking about. But Kevin Interdonato's not bad. And I would have liked to see more out of Adam Radcliffe and some of the other actors and actresses as well. It wasn't bad. So there you have it. So go out next week and watch the film. And we will see everybody back here on Mob Talk Radio at some point in the near future.